Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar in our Management Matters series. Today's webinar will focus on using skills analysis to create strong, versatile teams. I'm Kaylee Thomas, the Events Manager for Lab Manager, and I will be your moderator today. As you know, if you've been here before, we like our webinars to be very interactive, so we encourage you to send us your questions at any point during the webinar, and our speaker will address these during the Q&A session following the presentation. To ask a question, all you have to do is type your query into the question box on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. We will try to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session, but if we happen to run out of time, I will forward any unanswered questions to the presenter, and he can respond to you via email. So let's get on with the reason you are all here. Scott Hanton earned a BS in chemistry from Michigan State University and a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. After graduation, he joined the Analytical Science Department at Air Products and Chemicals, Inc. In a 20-year career at Air Products, Scott had research roles in laser science and mass spectrometry, and lab management roles, progressing from lab supervisor to section manager. Scott is now the Chief Scientist and Laboratory Operations Manager for Intertech Laboratory in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He is also on the Board of Directors for the Association of Lab Managers, ALMA, and is on the editorial board of the American Society for Mass Spectrometry, ASMS. Welcome back, Scott.
Thank you, Kaylee. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank all of you who are out there participating in this series. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some of the information that we have about how we use skills analysis and other inventories to improve the performance of our lab staff. So the object of this talk today is to really focus in on a data-driven process to improve how we acquire new staff, how we train the existing staff, and how we evaluate the staff that we have. I always like to start these presentations off with some thank yous, so I always put the acknowledgement slide in the front in case I go long. Sherry and Todd are key management colleagues here at Intertech Allentown, and they participate with me very closely in the process I'm about to describe. There are a variety of our other colleagues at Intertech Allentown who also participate, and I have to thank all of them. The roots of this process we brought across when we were transferred from Air Products to Intertech, and so I had colleagues at Air Products who helped me develop these processes, and they worked really well. And then finally, I need to thank the Tennessee Valley Authority, and you'll see a slide from them later in this talk about critical skills analysis. Kaylee gave a very nice introduction. Thank you, Kaylee. I list this slide to show that I'm both a technical person, technical contributor, and now a key manager at Intertech Allentown, and have responsibilities in both sides. A little bit of history about us at Intertech Allentown I think helps put the basis for this presentation. We joined the Intertech network in July of 2010. Prior to that, we were an internal corporate analytical group at Air Products and Chemicals. Today, our staff consists of about 46 people who do both technical and administrative roles. Our lab within the network is truly the R&D lab for the Western Hemisphere for Intertech. We are challenged primarily with problem solving and with developing new methods and modifying existing methods. We can do testing, but it's not the primary focus of our research. A lot of times the testing labs that are located all around the country, the customers there ask, why was this result, or how could this happen? And the how and the why questions tend to come to us in Allentown. And part of that means that we have a very broad staff. We also have a very senior staff. And that means from a people perspective that we have a lot of skill diversity that we need to maintain, continue to develop in order to have for our customers. All businesses start with the people. And so this is an introduction for a skills analysis presentation. The people are the key thing of any business, regardless of what you're doing. And it's certainly the staff that we have here at Intertech Allentown are the absolute necessity for what we're trying to do. What skills they have in the labs, what problems they can solve, that drives how we deliver for our customers. And we also understand that the skills of the people can and almost certainly will change over time as we continue to learn, continue to train, and continue to grow new capabilities. From a management staff, what we're really interested in here is we have to be able to identify the skills that people have and identify the skills that our customers are requiring for us to deliver, and be able to evaluate those both by what skills are at risk and what gaps we have. And the object of this webinar is really to go through this process, show you how we do it, and share some of our experiences. The key to the process really is about the skills analysis, and I want to talk some about the assumptions that we make, and then show you a little bit about how we define analytical skills. I'll speak a little bit to sub-skills, and then how do we analyze the skill base? And we really have to do that analysis two different ways. We have to look clearly at what we have and how our customers are making use of those skills. We also have to look clearly at where we think there's potential for growth of the business through enhanced skills. Through this process, we're going to identify both our strengths and our gaps, and I'll comment on both of those. And then how do we formulate plans in order to address whatever gaps we observe? And that has to be done in sort of a plan summary, or at least a set of actions that we're going to proceed to. Our assumptions and our goals, and in some ways those things overlap, so I put them into a single slide. As I mentioned before, our business has great skill diversity, and so we require a very broad set of analytical skills. Broad both in the range of science that we do here, and broad into the depth of science that we do here. So it's a bit of a two-dimensional problem of range versus depth. We have to constantly grow our skills in order to grow the business. So Intertek Allentown is a contract analytical business, and we respond to a wide variety of customer problems. Our ability to solve new problems is one of the key drivers for the growth of our business. As with many businesses today, we have a lot of senior staff. And that's a great thing from talking to customers about what we can do and what our skill sets are. It's also a risk in that at some point those senior staff members are going to start to retire. In fact, we've already seen some significant retirement losses. And we know that this is going to be a significant problem as we move through the next, say, 5 years. We need to have a process that's going to enable us to find the skills we need and to grow the ones that we need to grow internally. We need to make data-driven decisions, and a lot of what I'm going to show you is how we're collecting data to understand what labs have more potential for growth of the business and which ones can create the most impact for the business, and then trying to balance those opportunities for growth with what our risks are, and to make sure that we're not losing opportunity as we're trying to grow the business. I don't expect you to be able to see this slide. The typing is small, but the concept is that we're organized into 3 distinct work teams. Each of those work teams are charged with delivering a different kinds of analytical skills to the business. One of the work teams is called Inorganic Analysis, and it's charged with a wide variety of things like trace metals and titrations and microscopy, surface analysis, X-ray diffraction, and a variety of other physics labs. Another work team is called Material Properties, and it's really charged with understanding how materials behave under different conditions. A lot of polymer work, some catalyst work. We do rheology, thermal analysis, absorption, calorimetry, those sorts of problems. And then our third work team is Organic Analysis, and it has all the traditional organic analysis techniques like chromatography and mass spectrometry, a variety of spectroscopies like FTIR and NMR. When you put all of that together, if you were to randomly open a page of an analytical textbook, we probably have the expertise and the equipment to solve those kinds of problems. And again, it's a very broad skill set that we're working from. The first part of our skills analysis process is to really understand the skill level of all the scientists who work in our laboratories. We've developed a shorthand to describe that skill level assessment by creating 3 buckets of skills. Now we have a more detailed career ladder that has promotion opportunities within each of these 3 main areas. At the top of the pyramid are our subject matter experts, or SMEs. And these are the local and world experts in the particular kinds of science that they work in. They're They are the key brains behind the operation. They're the absolutely crucial problem solvers, and they have both the experience and the knowledge in order to develop new methods, to develop new capabilities, and to drive new offerings out to our customers. The middle level, the practitioners, also we might call them chemists, are the solid middle level contributors. They're the workhorse of the operation. They have wide-ranging skills. They're able to implement the different techniques that the scientists or the subject matter experts develop. They also have their own skills around modifying methods. And so a lot of the work they do is evaluating whether the current method is appropriate or they need to make small alterations to that method in order to solve the problem. The third group are the operators, and they're a group of junior chemists and technicians, and their key responsibility is twofold. They are responsible for creating high-quality data, and they're responsible for keeping all the instruments in the labs running. We really espouse a team approach, and on any given problem, there's going to be people from all three areas working on the problem. And they each have their roles to play, and teamwork and community is crucial for how we go about doing our business. We can evaluate the skill levels of each of these areas, and we start to count them up in the laboratories. So we're going to assign each individual within the laboratory one of these three buckets. And then we can measure how many we have of each of the three areas, the subject matter experts, the practitioners, and the operators in each of our laboratory areas. So in this slide, you see a graph that's showing each of our identified lab sections and the skill set distribution within each of those lab sections. Before you spend too much time trying to figure out what the x-axis code is, let me just share with you that our legal department decided that I couldn't name all of our lab sections by exactly what we call them. So this is a secret code to keep our lab sections identities secret, and that's driven by our legal department. But the key message here is that we have a variety of different laboratories. Each laboratory is delivering a different kind of science, and each laboratory is populated with a different distribution of skill sets. We can look across the skill set distribution of all the laboratories and we can see some opportunities. For example, if we look in the MN lab section, there's only one person in that lab, and that person is an operator. We're seeing the opportunity to grow that business if we could just bring in some more skill set. And so there's an opportunity to bring in a higher level contributor, whether that person is at the scientist or the chemist level, we need to determine. But there's a real opportunity there. Also, right near that, the LD lab section has a world expert in that space and a number of practitioners, but they have no lab technicians. And perhaps we could leverage the expertise of the more senior people by bringing in an operator to help with the workflow in that lab so that we could really drive the work to the right level of experience and knowledge. And that's how we go about looking at this kind of chart. It wasn't by design, but interestingly, right now our skill set is pretty evenly distributed across the senior experts, those key middle-level practitioners, and the lab operations people who keep everything running and create all the data. Once we understand what the skill level assessment is across the labs, we as a management team really have to pay careful attention to how we manage performance. So we have different expectations for those levels, and we want to make sure that we are actively driving their development and trying to get the most for each person out of what they're willing to put into the lab. So our performance management process has a number of components, and it's really critical for how we approach skill growth. The first, and I think the most important, and I set it off in bold, is to set effective annual objectives to make sure that each person in the organization understands their role, understands how they're going to contribute, and understands how we're going to evaluate their performance. We've understood in our performance management process, we spend the most time working on objectives, and that makes the whole year's process for supervision go so much better. We require feedback during the year, and that could be formal and informal. On the formal side, we require at least one formal interim review where the supervisor and the staff member are together to talk specifically about performance and objectives. And this is kind of a practice run for the final performance review. If everything's going well, that's great. It really reinforces the behavior of that staff member. If there's some issues, it gives us a long lead time to resolve those issues before we get to the performance review process. Another key part of performance management is we have to rate the performance of each individual, and that's both qualitative and quantitative. And we require a clear, written, documented annual performance review that makes everybody understand exactly what their contributions were. We then can take those contributions and connect it to performance as part of the whole performance management process. As I said earlier, setting objectives is really the most important part of our internal skill growth process. And so we're going to spend extra time developing the objectives. We're very careful to follow a SMART objectives process. SMART's an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and timely objectives. They have to be specific or the person doesn't really know what you're asking them to do. They have to be measurable, or how do you understand whether the objective has been completed or not? And how do you understand that it's been completed in a way that we can get to with healthy technical debate, but it's not really philosophy. It's not really a one person said or the other person said. There's something that we can measure and clearly identify what's been done. They have to be achievable because we have to have complete buy-in of the staff. They need to be engaged in this process and really have a fundamental understanding and belief that they can achieve the results that we're looking for. They need to be reasonable because they have to contribute directly to the business. We really want to shape the behaviors of the scientists to drive the success of the business. So that the goals have to all stack up and add up to what's needed for the business. And they need to be timely because everything we're doing is done against the clock. And so the objectives for people need to be connected to the calendar so that we have can draw the direct connection between their contributions and the outcome for the business. In the end, the objectives really become the template for somebody's accomplishments at the end of the year. There's a number of important outcomes that come from our performance management process. The first, and I think the most important, is by giving effective feedback, we're really guiding the development of the staff. And our goal is to grow from within. Of our senior experts here in Intertech Allentown, 3 of them started off as hourly lab technicians. And 30 years later, they're world experts at the science that they do. And we have a very strong history of growing people internally and using this process in order to develop world-class skills. In our development process, we are really interested in growing people's strengths. When we go out and recruit new staff, we are most focused on what they are good at. And I think most individuals have their own motivation about what they're good at. So we hire people for their strengths. We want to develop their strengths further. And so we're not interested in identifying people's weaknesses and then trying to grow their weaknesses. We want to use our performance management process to drive excellence. And you drive excellence by continually, year after year, growing people's strengths. If you focus on weaknesses at this point, the best you can hope for is mediocrity. And that's not what drives our business. We want to have sufficient diversity in our staff that one person's weaknesses are covered by another person's strengths. And by following a true team approach, our customers only see our strengths and the weaknesses are hidden. In this process, we're also developing our cross-training plans, and that helps us build skills internally. We're also evaluating performance, and if necessary, we will add by subtraction. And so we will use performance improvement plans to address poor performance, and we will let the wrong people go if that's the right outcome for the business. Right now, we are using two of our staff are on a PIP in order to actively improve their performance. Sorry, just a little slip with the mouse, didn't click in the right place for the slide change. The next key part of this process is evaluating from the customer what they need. This is really a voice of the customer process, where we're using the data that we have available to us in order to understand what the pull is on our resources. And as we go to make decisions about whether it's new hires or internal development or even the relative importance of skill sets that we have in the lab, we're going to try to find the data that we have available in order to understand where the opportunities are. In this chart, you're seeing a relative workload analysis against all of the different lab sections. And there's highs and lows in this analysis, and each provides opportunities. For example, I can look at the red arrow that is over the IT lab section. And that arrow is showing us that in IT lab section, we have a lot of work. There's just a lot of, so the customers are voting with their feet. And 3 of those lab sections that are marked with arrows are showing high workload. So that's potential to grow more work in those areas. In many ways, we believe that we are limited in the amount of work that we can deliver to customers in those 3 labs because there isn't sufficient people power in order to drive more work for our customers. There's one other arrow on there, and that's over the LD lab section. That lab section's work follows a very different process. It's not so much sample driven. Most of our labs have work that's driven by the samples come in, and we're doing something about the sample in order to answer the customer's question. In the LD lab section, almost 80% of their work is driven by projects. And so there's not so many counts of analyses, but the work is very people intensive. And again, we feel like that lab section, if we had more people power, we could drive more work. Another set of data that we need to use in making these skill set decisions is to really look at revenue for the laboratory. How much, we've looked in the previous slide about how much work comes in. Now let's look at how the work is distributed versus the revenue of the laboratory. And again, we see highs and lows across all the lab sections. I must say that the workload analysis on the previous slide is reasonably straightforward to understand. We have a laboratory information management system, or a LIMS system, that puts at my desktop the data that describes the work that goes through the lab, whether it's at the request level of a customer or the test level in the lab. And given sufficient energy, I can decompose that data and understand it to the amount of detail that I care to. Revenue is a little different, and so not all requests are the same. And so here we see more what is more difficult, or what has market drivers that allow it to be more lucrative to us as a business, or where do we have really significant competitors that drive the price for the work down. And while we have the staff and the people in order to address that kind of work, the revenue doesn't reflect the kind of benefit. Again, I've identified 4 laboratories where there's real potential. These are cases where we earn a fair amount of money for the amount of effort that we put in. And the thinking is, or the assumption is, that if we put more people here, we could continue to earn at this rate and help drive the growth of the business. So if we put these kinds of data together, we can create this sort of 2-dimensional chart where the impact is really about how much work is there. And the potential is about what sort of rewards do we get from the marketplace for doing this kind of work. When we have both high impact and high potential, then those are great places to invest more in the science and the skills and the scientists that we have. In this chart, you can see that we're really focusing on the high potential laboratories as ways to grow our business. There are some of the labs that have high impact today, but really only have limited potential moving forward. And that's from other data that I'm not showing today about what we think the market entails, or how many different customers we have, or what places that perhaps we have some key competitors that are interfering with the growth of the business. So this is a good time for me to again emphasize the need to make data-driven decisions. And if we can take data from many different sources, and so I have data sources here that are around our performance management and skill sets. I have data that's really driven by the workflow through the lab, which I can obtain from the LIMS. and I have data which is driven from our sales organization about the revenue and the margin of the business, and I can draw all of that together, then as a management team, it allows us to really focus on the things that we think are most important as we try to grow the business. One other aspect of this problem is important. So I said at the beginning that one of my assumptions was that all the staff that's retirement eligible won't retire on the same day. That would be a crisis for our business. So I've analyzed all of the staff that we have across the different lab sections, and I've grouped them into decades, from 20s to 50 plus. And the astounding stat that leaps off of this slide is that today 50% of our staff is aged 50 or greater. And that is a significant risk. And yes, I understand that people will retire for very many different reasons and will make decisions to leave the laboratory for very many different reasons. And age is not a single driver. So yes, that 50 plus right now today includes people up to age 67. So, and that 67-year-old individual is still a very energetic, very key contributor to the laboratory, and in fact does not plan to leave anytime soon. But it's important data from a probability perspective, and it helps us manage our risk. So again, you see 4 red arrows on this slide, and each of them points at a lab section where everyone associated with that lab section is aged 50 plus. And those are places where we really need to manage our risk, especially if those lab sections only have a single individual. Then there's no easy way to share that risk amongst different individuals. And so now age distribution becomes another data point that goes into our process for evaluating what we're going to do next. I put in my acknowledgments at the beginning, the Tennessee Valley Authority. This slide comes from them, this critical knowledge capture, and we thank them for introducing us to this concept. And it really makes the process of understanding where your critical knowledge is and where your risks are far easier to understand. So let me explain this slide. On the left slide, it's the risk of individuals leaving. Right now, we're looking at within 2 years to within 6 years. That's the time frame that we're planning for. Of course, it's uncertain. We can take age into account. We can take guesses into account. We can take sort of the hallway conversations around happiness and unhappiness into account. On the x-axis, we're trying to measure how critical the skill or knowledge is that those individuals can have. On the right side of that, this is irreplaceable. This is the buildup of tacit knowledge that comes from years of experience doing the things that we do that's either hard or impossible to find in the marketplace. It's the stuff that you grow yourself rather than the stuff that you can go out and hire. In the middle column, there's tacit knowledge. It's important. You're not going to go pick up a book and read it and understand. But if you put out a job description, you can pull in people with resumes who have this kind of knowledge. On the left side, the knowledge is generally known. You can pick up a paper, a journal article, a magazine, the right textbook. You can read about it, and you can transfer that kind of knowledge from one individual to another in a relatively straightforward process. So we're mapping some key individuals here. You can see we have a number of individuals that we're concerned about leaving within the next 2 years. Let me point out our rightmost column, where we've got one individual from GD and another one from IT. The individual from GD, there's no red circle around it, and you might say, why aren't you focusing there? That seems like your biggest problem. My response is I've already focused there. I've already got a process to hire in that individual. In fact, the cross-train individual has already been hired into the GD lab and started 2 months ago. And so we're ahead of the curve on that one finally. If I'd have given this talk a year ago, there probably would have been 3 red circles around that GD. But as of today, we're in pretty good shape there. There are some other individuals that we're concerned about. I'm particularly concerned about having 4 individuals from the IT lab section on this chart. And so we've circled 2 of them as cross-training activities that we plan to implement right now. One way to address our issues is by bringing in new staff. And so we can talk about what our recruiting strategy is. Fundamentally, recruiting is the answer when the time scale is short. And so when we have either an existing high workload or we have customers who have the potential to come online very soon, then we're going to try to hire in to meet those needs. We're going to have to build a management business case in order to make new hires, and the risk to the existing business and the risk to the growth of the business are key aspects of any recruiting strategy for us. One of the key things we're going to look at when we're doing recruiting is addressing succession planning. For example, this was our answer to the issue in the GD lab. We're also going to look for places where we can bring in lower grade level individuals who have the potential to grow up and be our practitioners or subject matter experts sometime in the future. We're also using the risks from that age distribution chart to help focus us on our recruiting strategy. One other point about recruiting, we're always looking for specific technical skills. But one other aspect of our recruiting strategy is we always look for potential. If you're interested in learning more about recruiting, I will be giving an invited lecture at the ALMA annual conference in November that has a whole talk on this, what's covered in this one slide around recruiting. And I'll have information about the ALMA annual conference at the end of this talk. As we look across this whole process, we have some strengths and we have some gaps and we have some weaknesses. Some of our key strengths that we've learned about in this process is that as we follow the process and we really work hard to cultivate the data that we know is out there, that we have our hands on data that really allows us to make good decisions. The process that we're following and have followed now for a long time has helped us develop a very experienced and very skilled lab staff. I think it's an outcome of the process rather than a goal, but we ended up with nearly equal distribution of skill levels. We're continuing to evaluate whether that distribution of skill levels reflects the needs of our business today, but historically that distribution has worked well for us. Also, the process has driven senior expertise across almost all of our labs. And as we look across this staff of 46 people, we've got 5 people that I would count as world experts. And they can really contribute at the very highest levels of the work that they do. And as I mentioned before, 3 of them are internally homegrown, started here as lab technicians. As we continue to build this process, the customer need piece is critical. We can't build a skill inventory or skill development process in a vacuum. One of the key data points is what is needed. And in order to truly understand what is needed, we've got to get input from our customers. And we've been doing that pretty well over the last few years. Another key strength is that the young people that we're currently hiring are developing very nicely. And we're happy with how they're developing. Another important part of this process for us is the opportunity for continuous improvement. There's plenty of gaps, and we can look hard at those gaps in order to really understand where the process needs to be tweaked or where we better bring some more focus as a leadership team in order to really address some existing issues. So as we looked across this set of data, we were able to identify some important gaps. One is strictly around skill set. There are different lab sections that the right skill distribution isn't present, where either we need some more people at the operator level to free the more skilled folks to help grow the business, or maybe we need some higher level skill folk. We just can't quite get to all of the problems that our customers bring us, and those are gaps for us. There's another set of laboratories where the demand in the lab is simply outstripping our ability to deliver on it. And so it's really a question of we need more people power. And that'll lead to a sub-discussion of what skill sets, what skill levels. But first we've been able to identify those labs. Another key gap that we've been able to understand is there's a real difference in profitability across our labs. And that profitability difference needs to be a driving force to help us decide when and where do we make those investments. And it's a great tiebreaker. If I know that I'm going to be limited to the number of people I can bring in, I'm going to focus them first on the places that have the most potential, where we can have the best business performance. There's another set of laboratories that have a real potential to grow. That might be because the customer base is changing, or it might be because the competitive nature is changing. And then we have to worry about skill loss, and we've got to manage our risks. And that all provides, those are all gaps where we have to think about. There's some important short-term actions that come out of these plans. The first is we're putting a plan together in order to do some more hiring. Then we're going to put a plan together to do specific cross-training. One of the key observations right now is there's some labs where having some more operators could help us with succession planning, help us with that age distribution, and help us with targeting the senior people on the senior problems. Another interesting outcome is the decision to hire another administrator, another admin, in order to help share out kind of the non-technical work, to make sure that the science folks really have the opportunity to do science. Some short-term actions around training. One of our issues with all the breadth that we deal with here is our average scientist is pretty specialized. And we need to introduce more flexibility into our work staff so that we can deal with the peaks and valleys that come to every laboratory. We're going to emphasize it at the practitioner and operator level, and we're going to emphasize the need for it at our work team level. The idea that we have coverage maps and coverage matrices for each of the work teams helps us plan for vacations, helps us plan for retirements, helps us plan for the unexpected absence of employees. It gives us better coverage in the laboratory. It also helps us develop our staff, and that helps them grow their careers, which helps keep them with us, helps them make them happy, productive employees. And it's really a low-cost approach to driving more skill. Some of the long-term gaps that we need to think about in order to grow the business, we need to think and focus on those high-potential labs. That's where the investment brings the best payoff for our business. And we've got to continue to be conscious of the risk we have with that 50-plus population and make sure that we're not caught in a place where we're going to lose significant ability to deliver through a series of retirements. I want to remind you that it's very important to get that customer input. That's a key aspect for us, and we're measuring it from a couple of different avenues. And the long-term importance of development internally and doing the skill training and doing the knowledge transfer, and in order to really bring the young staff up to do the sort of things that you need them to do to be successful. Some of the outcomes. What have we learned? Last year we were able to hire 8 new staff. They were 6 operators and 2 practitioners. We successfully executed 7 official cross-training plans to give us more flexibility. And our performance management system worked well. We were able to replace 1 chronic poor performer, and that was really addition by subtraction. We took 1 scientist who was struggling in one particular lab, moved them to a new assignment, and now that person is performing very well. That's a real success story. And we've got, as I mentioned, 2 scientists who are struggling right now, and we're giving them really the mentoring and guidance they need to be more successful. I've got one slide here on skill training. I've done webinar in the past on knowledge transfer and training, and this is a whole topic of itself and something that can't be really well described in one slide, but for completion's sake, I think there's some key points to mention about skill training. First of all, we can do internal or external. We focus a lot of our effort on internal actions. We have a very active coaching or mentoring process that really helps guide people, whether they're new to the organization about how we do what we do, or it's a cross-training exercise where someone's trying to acquire a new skill. We do a fair amount of job shadowing and on-the-job training as a key training mechanism in the lab. In the job shadow, the student is watching. In the on-the-job training, the student is doing, and the teacher is watching. And those can be formal training processes that we use. This year we're doing far more external actions that we've done before. We have a new objective in our lab as part of our leadership team that 75% of our staff will get trained this year to acquire a new skill. And we are going to hit that. In fact, we're going to exceed that this year. And there's a whole series of external actions that can be done in order to improve skill. In summary, as a leadership team, I think it's absolutely critical that we spend the time to obtain the data so that we're making data-driven decisions. I think the history of management is, well, at least what I've experienced, is we have the right ideas. We get to the points of saying we need more skills, but then we don't really go back and find the data. And one of the changes I've seen over my career is by going out there, doing the work that's necessary to really understand the data that's in front of us, we've been able to consistently make good decisions. And that those data-driven decisions have really benefited us as an organization and us as a business. We work really hard to identify the skills that are currently in our business, and we identify the places that need more skill. We're trying to do this both in a growth pattern of trying to understand where the customer need is so that we can add skills to our portfolios, and understand the risks of where important skills are in the organization and try to mitigate those risks of when people leave, of the impact on the business. We develop formal plans to address gaps. They might be written plans around staff augmentation, trying to hire new people, around how we do performance management to get the most out of the people that we've got, and we have formal skill development or skill training plans in order to adapt the staff and retain them. A couple of notes about the Association of Lab Managers. If this webinar was useful to you, I hope it was. It was certainly fun for me to put the slides together and figure out a way to communicate our process to you. ALMA is another way to get more of this information. ALMA is really a networking organization where the object is sharing. Share knowledge, share ideas, share experience. There's a number of different ways to do it. The annual conference is coming up soon. And so this slide is about the annual conference. It'll be in Annapolis, Maryland this year at the Lowe's Hotel. There'll be 2 days of workshops on the 4th and 5th of November, and then the symposia are on the 6th and 7th of November. There's 3 main symposia this year: leading laboratory staff, managing work processes, and optimizing capabilities and facilities. And this webinar is a good example of the sort of presentations that you'll see at an ALMA conference. And so if this sort of information is of value to you, I would encourage you to explore ALMA, check out the website, and see if the ALMA organization could benefit you. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'd like to thank Kaylee and Lab Manager for the opportunity to present this webinar, and I would be more than happy to address any of your questions.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Scott. We have a few questions that have come in. You talked about recruiting staff. Someone was wondering where you advertise or post your job postings, and if you had any suggestions for that.
That's a great question. It's really interesting to me how many hits we get on our simply posting them on our company website. So I post them first on the Intertech Careers website, and I often get the number of hits that I need in order to find the candidates I'm looking for. If we need additional candidates or we're looking for something particularly special, we may post them on sites like Monster or Career Builder, but we get better solutions to these problems by using our own networking. So for example, I can post on my LinkedIn site that I'm looking for particular candidates, or I can network with the different societies that I belong to. So for example, I'm an active member of the local Mass Spec Society, and we have an email chain, and we can email postings out to other people. And that networking works great. And so my advice would be, number one, make use of what sort of posting capabilities your company has. 2, please do not underestimate the power of your network and use all the different strings that your network has available. And then 3, use the big career builder sorts of sites to really complete your search.
Perfect. Okay. Someone wanted to know about cross-training or providing education to grow the skills of your staff. What are the, you mentioned that you do some internally by job shadowing and things like that, and then you also send people to outside courses. What are the pros and cons of each of those?
Good question. I think the key pro of the internal training is that I don't have to ask anybody's permission to spend any money. I just need to manage people's time, help them make good decisions about the time that they spend. And because I have such a diversity of staff, I've got a lot of great teachers here. And so I really want to identify who my teachers are and utilize them to the best extent that we can to share that knowledge. The con of doing it internally is you're limited to what you have. And so if you don't have the skill that you need trained, you can't get there. You can't get home internally. Externally, the biggest challenge we have is paying for it. And so we have a strategy. We've had some successes. We've been able to demonstrate to senior management that the investment in the training is worthwhile, and we can put the spreadsheet together to show it. And I think from a leadership team, going that extra step to put the spreadsheet together to prove the business benefit of the training is worthwhile. The biggest benefit to external training is you can find anything you want. It's a matter of looking for it. We've had some good luck with particular vendors of training. I think our business has done very well with the local community colleges. They do one-day seminars and a wide variety of things that are useful to us. Also, companies like ALMA or SkillPath have done a good job of coming in here, and especially with supervisory or leadership topics, to help us get the training that we need.
Perfect. Okay, this is a very specific question. What if MN Lab is a very simple technique that the SME from the MT Lab could also do? What would be the point to bring a scientist or SME to this MN group?
Good question, and it's exactly the sort of things we need to puzzle on when we see data like this. So in order to understand that, what I did is I pulled on my network. I don't have a senior scientist here in the MN space, but I could contact a friend who had a friend who knew about what does a senior person in that space do? What sort of attributes do they have? And in about a half an hour phone call, I could understand what a person like that can contribute. Then I could go to our sales and marketing staff and say, if we had skills like this, do you think that would be of value? Are you hearing that from your customer? In this particular case, when we closed that whole feedback loop, and I was able to get information from our sales and marketing people, they were saying that would be great. We hear about these opportunities all the time, but we don't know how to address them. If we had somebody like that, we could really build the business. I could proceed from that then to get them to quantify those statements. We've turned away this many opportunities. We can put this kind of dollar value against those opportunities, and I can build a business case that an accountant can understand. Then I can and have gotten permission to hire in that skill set. Make sure I answered the question, and so if there's any feedback on that one.
Okay, yeah, if they get back, I will let you know. The next question is, would you consider hiring staff members that are 50 or older in age? What are the pros and cons of this?
Would I consider it? Yes, absolutely. Age is only an indicator. And so the pro of hiring people who are over 50 is they come with them their life experience. And they have seen and done a wide variety of things in their lives and in their careers. And so they're going to bring to you more nuance, more experience, more understanding, especially more understanding of the world, and perhaps most importantly, more understanding of themselves. What's the risk? I think there's two key risks to think hard about when you're looking at a potential hire who's over 50. One is, what sort of career path do they expect? And like I said, I've got a guy working for me now who's 67 with absolutely no intentions of retiring.
Right.
If 50 might be at the middle of their career, and we can't judge them based on the friend that we have who retired at 54. The other key thing that we have to look at is what is their history and why are they in the marketplace. Somebody else may have made a big mistake and made this person available to you, and it could be a great success for you. But we have to go through all the same due diligence we do with any hire and look critically at a resume to say, is this person a job hopper? Is this person unable to complete the work? Get the references, make sure the person's going to be a good employee. A person over 50 should have a lot more history and give us a lot more data about whether they're going to be successful in our role or not. But I think too many people discount employees over 50 because they're worried about retirement, and I think that's a real mistake. I think there's a real rich body of potential employees out there, and we can't discount them or we're doing our business a disservice.
Perfect. So this person really liked your skills analysis, inventories, your great graphs, all of that, the way you laid it out. But they're worried that it might be time-consuming for them when they have such a limited amount of time. Can you let us know how long that took you, and then also whether you would suggest outsourcing this task to some sort of company?
Let me tackle those as two separate questions. I think whenever you do an analysis like this, the first time you do it is pretty hard. And I would have to say that I went through a bunch of dead ends. I developed some charts that made no sense, that I couldn't understand, or in the end just didn't help us with this process. So I think there's a real investment of time and energy in order to figure out what data you need. Now as we do this sort of on an annual basis, I can get all of these charts together in about one day. And so now I know what I need to do. I know where the data is. I know how I want to proceed with the analysis. And that investment I put into it several years ago to figure out where the data was and how to manipulate it, that has really paid off. And so I run a science business, much like we're going to invest in R&D in order to grow a new capability, we as managers or we as leaders need to invest a bit of our own selves in some research and development to figure out how to run the business better. And this is a good example of that. As for outsourcing it, I'm not sure how you would go about doing that. And that's spoken from somebody who's running a business that specializes in outsourcing. The data that you're looking for is very specific to you. And frankly, a lot of it's pretty proprietary. So I'm not sure how you're going to go about outsourcing things like what are the ages of my staff, what are the skill sets of my staff, how my profitability varies from different laboratories. There's a degree that you're the only one who has the data, and there's a degree of you don't really want anybody else to know it anyway. So, and that's part of what my legal staff was worried about me publishing the real x-axis. What is our profitability by technique? They weren't happy with me talking about that because they considered it proprietary.
Perfect. The next question is, did you ask for personal input from individuals regarding their skill set, or was that just basically based on their job description? I know
we asked for input. Sorry, Kayla, do you have more of the question?
No, I was just going to say, I know a lot of people, their managers think they do certain things, but they aren't necessarily aware of extra things that they may need to do.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And as a manager, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. So we definitely asked for input, and we asked for two key pieces of input. One is we asked for everybody to submit a CV or a resume to us. And especially the senior people, it's like, I've worked here for 30 years, and you need me to submit to you a resume? Yes, because I want you to tell me what your key skills are. We also asked everyone to write a job description, and I only wanted one paragraph. I just wanted the very high-level view of why are you here? What do you do? And those two pieces of information were really interesting. I would say 80% of them, if I'd have written them, I'd have gotten them right. But 20% of them, I'd have gotten wrong. And it was really worth the effort for me to learn what those differences were in that 20%.
Okay. The next question was, you mentioned PIP staff. When do you let them go?
So firing somebody is always a difficult and emotional decision. The way we do it here is, in essence, as the process unspools, the person is essentially choosing to leave. So when we set objectives and goals in a PIP, we start with quarterly objectives. If that doesn't work, we go to monthly objectives. If that doesn't work, we're getting to weekly objectives. If someone is not able to meet weekly objectives, so we meet on Friday, every Friday, and we talk about what are you going to do next week, and we agree to it, and it's not done by the next Friday, and this repeats week after week after week, my feeling is that person has chosen to not fulfill the objectives. And at that point, the decision to let them go is pretty easy.
Okay, fair enough. Now, when you do hire someone new, do you make it clear their objectives? Do you do it sort of the similar thing? They do a weekly objectives and go to monthly objectives, or do they just jump right in?
We do a similar thing, but not exactly the same. So when they're hired, they're given a job description. So their role within the laboratory is clearly defined. They are given 3 different sets of objectives. They're given a 90-day objective, they're given a 6-month objective, and they're given a 12-month objective. So that they can see the growth of their skills and the priority by which they grow them. So the 90-day is going to tell them, this is the first stuff you need to accomplish, this is the most important things to get started with. This is going to set you on the path for success. And then at 6 months, there's another set of objectives of what they need to accomplish, and then following at 12 months. And there's a midterm review at each point. So there's a midterm review at 45 days, a midterm review at 3 months. The 6 months coincides before the performance review at the end of the 12 months. So we're trying to give them as much input as we can. We also set them up clearly with a mentor who is different from their supervisor, who is explaining to them behind the scenes how all of this stuff works.
Perfect. Now, the next question was sort of about reviews. How often do you review the skills and that sort of thing with seasoned employees?
Annually. So even somebody who says, I've been doing this for 30 years, there's still value in the conversation of, this is what you've been doing, what would you like to do differently? And the answer might be nothing, but it's worth the conversation.
Right, perfect. So how do you, the next person is wondering, how do you determine the right, percentage of skills for your lab and the skill level?
So that's an excellent question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer. What we're trying to do is, it's almost, for those of you in the audience who are chemists or engineers, we're almost looking for a mass balance equation here. We're looking at all the opportunities, we're looking at our ability to deliver the opportunities, and can we close the gap? Or do we have certain parts of our staff who are sitting idle for some reason at some time? If we have the perfect distribution, then our staff skill set mix exactly matches what our business needs. It never does. So then we do gap analysis to try to understand how to fix the problem.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions that have come in. If you have additional questions, perfect. Thanks, Scott. You can reach out to Scott. As you can see, he's the true expert in this field. His email there is on the screen. Also, you can see the link to the video that will be available. You'll also be emailed to let you know when that video is available for viewing. So we would like to remind you that this is an ongoing educational webinar series, and if you have any suggestions for this series, please do not hesitate to contact us. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your time, for taking a break from your busy schedules to join us, and also thanks to Scott for all his hard work putting together this presentation. We hope you can join us again next time. Thank you and goodbye.